What is going on, everyone? It's your guy, Cole Jackson, back with another episode of the Two Guys Watching Football Training Camp Preview Series for your Baltimore Ravens. If you're enjoying this series, do me a favor, click that like button right now. And if you want to find your way back for more, click the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode drop. Today, we are joined by recurring guest, friend of the program, friend from across the pond. It is James Ogden of Red Star Baltimore and the Russell Street Report. James, my guy, how is it going?
Things are good, Cole. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely, and you're recovering from yesterday's loss. As everyone knows, James is British, and we had a bit of an L for Team England in the Euro Cup final.
Yeah, it wasn't great last night, but I suspect we'll be back. I think we'll be back next year. But yeah, it wasn't a great night for us. And also being, I meant to say, also being English, I was recording. I've recorded with Mike for the defensive line preview, and as I was thinking, sort of thinking, you'll be able to, if you don't enjoy my talking as much, and you want to switch off when I'm talking, I've got a really great drinking game for you, which is to drink when I slip into an American accent, because there are now words that I can't say non-English. So, like, I was thinking about JK Dobbins for this episode, and I was thinking he's got really good processing, but I really should say processing. So I'm really sorry for any English people who watch this. But
that's awesome. No, I love it. And, man, when I started writing for Russell Street Report, I ran into that problem where because I'm a policy analyst for work, so when I obviously write Canadian spelling, but I kept running into this issue where when I'd write my articles, either my editor would want to kill me because I'd spell the word wrong, or my boss would want to kill me because I'd spell those words wrong. And so it just becomes a mismatch of anyway. So today we're jumping into the running back group for this preview. We're going to run through the personnel, how things could shake out, look at a couple of the key features. Running back's a little bit of an interesting beast this year because there's not a whole lot going on in terms of additions. So we're going to throw this up. Let's take a look here. We got JK Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill back. We have Tyson Williams back, who was with us last year on practice squad. And, of course, we have Pat Ricard back as the fullback. On the UDFA side, we only have one new addition, and that's Nate McCrary. We're going to get into him a little bit later. Not included on here, which some people may be wondering where it is. I do not have Ben Mason. We are going to get into that later. So it isn't an obvious omission. We'll get into later why. So, where I want to start, this is one of the position groups where we're probably not going to see a whole big competition for the starting role. And that's simply because of the running back rotation that we've seen the Ravens use. In 2020, it was a lot of Dobbins and Gus towards the end of the year. In 2019, it was Ingram and Gus. And, it was kind of where in 2019, Ingram was a bit more of the lead back, but then Gus would kind of come in as a change of pace. And last year, Ingram was still kind of factored in, but it was a little bit of a different approach. And so, where I want to start, because, we're not necessarily debating who's going to really be these top two guys. I think we know it's going to be Dobbins and Gus. So rather than that, let's take a look a little deeper into it. So how do you think they'll roll out Dobbins and Gus compared to last year?
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting this year to see how this position shakes out. And like you say, with the usage of Dobbins and Gus, I think the one thing that really stood out to me last year, I think, was the way Dobbins' understanding of the scheme progressed as we went through the year. And I think it will only continue to progress too. We've heard him talk about how important he feels that is. And actually, I think there was a change in coaching at Ohio State during his career there. And it sort of clicked for him and he got the scheme. Still putting up a lot of numbers before that click as well. But I think we might see a change in usage in some ways with regards to that, possibly, and we'll get into this later, possibly with a slight change in the scheme as well. But I think it will only be natural. I think that he'll start, his mental processing is so good that I think he will start to understand the scheme more and be utilized more because of that.
Yeah, and you made a good point because, we are going to get a little bit more into scheme specifically, but specifically when Dobbins was at Ohio State, they they were very varied in their in play calling, and that's kind of similar. When I went back and watched this tape, I was like, well, this is good because that's what he's going to see with the Ravens, you know. And I know every team is kind of doing a lot of these, you know, varied approaches. No one's just doing one thing or the other. But, you know, Ohio State really seemed to mix it up the way the Ravens would. So that was always exciting to me coming into a Greg Roman offense where, you know, you're going to see inside zone, outside zone, duo, all that kind of good stuff. And what I think gives Dobbins a big edge towards being a feature back is the fact that he can kind of do everything. And, you know, Gus has developed that. And we talked about that when we had you on after the Gus extension. But, you know, Gus is still developing his ability to kind of be more multidimensional, whereas I think Dobbins has a bit higher potential in that aspect.
Yeah, so I thought the same as you, that Ohio State really varied their offense. And I'm gonna quote PFF in a second, but let's put aside, like, not about Dobbins specifically, just the data, because that's the stuff that's usable. But I think what I thought when I looked at Dobbins this year, I think what I started to see was a bit of a pattern emerging for me that saw his zone. When we called zone, he was much more comfortable, and it was borne out, I think, in the yardage that he got. You know, like the result that he got from zone runs was much more positive. In the gap runs that I could find on tape, there were examples where he didn't quite. His vision in zone really plays up. It doesn't play up as much in gap. And so I went back and looked at his usage at Ohio State, and he actually had. So he I've lost the. He had 528 zone runs versus 189 gap runs, and that's according to PFF. So it might not be great numbers, those, but that's what they say. So I think that does tell you that he maybe wasn't. I think what I'm trying to get to is that you're right. His skill set overall projects to being a feature back in any scheme, but his immediate scheme fit would, like, if he was going to contribute immediately day one to the level that he might be able to, I think he'll be able to contribute eventually, it would have been in a more zone heavy scheme.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's kind of like that type of ratio, maybe a little bit less so, but it's something you do see with the Titans, because that was one thing that surprised me when I got into the Titans before we played them. I found in 2020 they ran more gap concepts than we had seen in 2019, where it was a lot of stretch zone. And you know, it's kind of the same thing with the Cleveland Browns, that when, you know, they kind of nailed down their offensive line, which is a very, very good offensive line, and they're very zone heavy, but they still have those gap concepts worked in. And that's kind of what I meant at the start of, like, you know, everyone's kind of doing a little bit of varied. I just think the Ravens do a lot more varied, where they don't really have a dominant concept. So, you know, and how do you see, like, you know, we talked about it before, but in case some viewers missed it, like, what did you see from Gus Edwards in 2020 that, you know, really spoke to that kind of step in development that he took?
Yeah, I think the step that Gus took was a like, I think for me it was a patience. He always had the shiftiness to him that was really helpful. I think what he learned, and again, this I think is what comes with running backs, the kind of understanding of the scheme, getting more and more live reps. He just knew much better how to set up his blocks, and was taking advantage of those with real patience. And then when he was doing that shiftiness, and he has enough explosion and enough top speed to be able to take advantage then of that. And I think that was, for me, was the main difference, was he just seemed much more comfortable. And especially, I mean, he was especially good on gap runs for me. I think me and you both have said before that we kind of underestimated him a little bit, thinking it was a bit more because of the zone read offense. But actually, when you see even in you know, runs where it's gap and it's not zone, you are seeing Gus sort of play a lot better.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing is now that, like, I do expect Dobbins to take more of the snaps. I expect him to have more rushes on a typical game, but we're still going to see healthy doses of Edwards, sorry. And, you know, the Ravens have made that no secret. When you pay a guy, you like the guy, and they gave him a couple years and they gave him pretty good money. So it's very exciting. And I think what really makes me feel good now is when Edwards comes into the game, it's not just going to be a lot of veer reads, right? Like they can now run just about any concept with Edwards, whereas they didn't necessarily seem to feel that comfortable doing so in 2019. And the stats speak for themselves. I mean, he had a very high average yards per carry. And I had a graphic, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but when you broke it down by option concepts versus zone concepts versus power concepts, it just wasn't. His average on option concepts was something like 7 yards per carry. So it really inflated his overall average, which is fine. But like we've said, and we talked about in our previous episode on the Gus signing, his ability to develop his effectiveness in those other two areas, it not only opens up the play calling possibility, but it changes the way the defense has to prepare for when he comes into the game. And that is invaluable. They can't do things like the charge mesh to kind of, make Lamar keep it and then bring down like a safety or a corner to try and challenge Lamar. We saw that quite a bit at the end of 2019 where they were trying to kind of combat Edwards' effectiveness. So I think that's going to go a long way in really helping the entire offense take a step forward. And actually, this would be a great point to jump into it. So we've talked a lot about the varied scheme. We're going to see veer, we're going to see zone, we're going to see gap. So, what I want to ask is, how do you see their run scheme evolving even further with the current group? And is there any sort of concept that you think could emerge a little bit more than what we've seen the last 2 years?
Yeah, I do think the scheme will evolve. I think Greg Roman is always looking to add more running plays to his playbook. I think you will just see. First of all, I do think you'll see more zone, and I also think you will see continued increasing effectiveness on the veer, and I think and especially the inverted veer. And I think the reason for that is, so I'm talking about the veer specifically, I feel like with Justice Hill, they were looking for a speedier back that people would have to respect on the inverted veer. And I think while Justice has not necessarily lived up to the expectations I think they had of him, and we can talk about that a bit later, Dobbins, has that explosiveness, that top end speed that you have to respect on that veer. And I think we then started to see more of those inverted veer concepts have much more success. And it got to the point where, when you can have that, you can't, like you said before, it takes away the defense's ability. They can't just make Lamar keep it. They've got to defend a lot more. And I think we'll see more of that. But I specifically think the main thing we'll see some more of is zone concepts. And I know you want to speak to that.
Oh, I'm so excited. If this could be the time where the Ravens could really hit down on the emergence of the inside zone concept, I think it's going to go so far in taking the pressure off of everybody in the offense. I think if you can run an effective inside zone with the way their current scheme is going, it just creates easy matchups. And then if teams want to do basically what we saw in Buffalo, where they're like, let's just attack every gap. Well, your zone is automatically creating numbers games. It's meaning all those backside defenders are a lot less important, and it kind of takes away that second layer of the defense, where if you can get one combo block into the second level and you've committed more defenders horizontally to cover those extra gaps, like we saw with man blitzes, it just opens up more down the field. And we saw it in Cincinnati, that 83-yard Dobbins touchdown run that he had, that was inside zone. And I think I'd have to check Mike's numbers. Mike charts like a madman. I think we had less inside zone in 2020 than in 2019, but it was more effective. And I think it was almost like we ran half as much last year. So it really went away. We were very gap heavy. We were very counter heavy. And well, at least in the latter part of the season. And we used a lot of outside zone, but we have to remember that outside zone in the path of the running back helped set up that counter, because that's really what was pulling defenses that allowed those seal blocks to come back the other way when we'd run the counter bash. And so, those concepts are obviously going to still be there, but, maybe they become more of home runs, whereas we kind of started using it going into the playoffs as like a core concept. And that really surprised me. And it just, when you're pulling two linemen to go block, it just opens up ways for guys to shoot the backside of plays. And I think that's kind of what the Bills and even the Titans did quite well in the playoffs. So if you can get them to if you get the defense to start attacking that way, but then you can run a really effective inside zone and kind of open up those lanes, it's going to lead to some big gains because they're committing second and third level defenders horizontally to cover gaps.
And this is the thing with Dobbins, that if you go back and I've gone back and watched a number of his games, a number of the All-22 on his games, and this is, he has plus vision, and he has outstanding burst and explosion. And when you combine the vision and the burst, and he has the mental processing ability he has, he picks cutback lanes better than I've ever seen in a college prospect when I watched him coming out. And then I've seen it translate just not very much in the pros, because we didn't utilize him that way. We didn't have that many plays, as you mentioned. So I think you bring that in, you're going to see even more out of Dobbins, I think, because that just plays up to his strengths massively.
Absolutely. And I think, because I want to make sure we're showing Gus love, because, it's not just going to be the Dobbins show, but I think the very fact that we've seen that type of development out of Gus with his vision and his ability to kind of develop himself in zone concepts, it's, he has that same type of explosiveness. It's not necessarily on the same level. They're not the same type of player, but he's still an explosive runner. And when he explodes into a cutback, he takes off, and he can, have enough wiggle to make, maybe those fewer second, third level guys miss, that kind of creates that big thing, or a big run. And so I think it makes a ton of sense when you really look at it that way.
Yeah. And when you've got two backs like that are so versatile like that, because you how do you prepare for that as a defense? Like so you see the offensive line take a zone step, and then you can read for that, but you've absolutely no idea really. You could say, if you're running two running backs like that, and Gus is predominantly gap and Dobbins is predominantly zone, you can start to play it, but we can literally run a 50-50 split, and it won't affect the effectiveness. That sounds like it won't affect the effectiveness of the play, I don't think.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things where everyone's like, we need to pass more. I'm like, nope, I need to see how these run concepts are gonna work themselves out, because it is so fun to watch. For as much crap as Roman takes with his ability to use pass plays to set up other pass plays, his ability to set up teams with run plays, and the way he used outside zone or outside zone to set up the counter bash, like it was mastery. And you were just sitting there waiting for that counter bash to come out, and then Lamar's splashing it for touchdowns on all four NFC East teams. Like, it was freakish. And so that's the thing, where if they can kind of get more of those core concepts that they can run effectively, and don't discount the way inside zone can lead to some nice bootleg type plays, that sort of thing. So I think they could do more. I also think they could maybe run a little bit more under center. It's something that they just haven't done. And so I wouldn't say that it's a prediction, but that possibility comes out a little bit more too.
Yeah. Just getting the evaluator out of me a little bit. So a couple of other things to touch on, I think, with the two of them, just to talk about their strengths a little bit, especially Gus, I think, who has become a really competent pass protector and receiver out of the backfield. I think is a very underrated part of his game. I think Dobbins is a really interesting perspective on those two fronts, because I think, again, he is developing on both those fronts. In Ohio State, I felt he had some trouble sometimes IDing rushes, and he has got better in that regard. I think he's still not quite IDing danger very, very well. I think he needs to improve on that angle. I also think that as a receiver, and this is where PFF really dings him, is as a receiver. It's why they have him rated so low, because he did drop a few balls this year. So I went back and looked at drops from how many drops he had in college. He never had more than 2 in a season, because I do remember thinking this kid's going to, like, he wasn't catching a ton of balls at Ohio State, but they weren't asking him to. And when he did, he looked fluid in routes. He looked like he had natural hands. I think the problems he had this year was honestly just a concentration, and basically you could even see it on some of his catches. He was looking upfield before he'd secured the ball.
Absolutely.
He still managed to catch it, but there were times when he dropped it too. So
Yeah, Mike and I pulled all of his drops. So, we're very lucky. We have at Yoshi 2052 at our disposal, who is a walking Ravens encyclopedia. So make sure you're following him if you're not for some reason. So I reached out to him. I was like, "Can you hit me up with every spot where Dobbins had a missed target? Then you can use the play descriptions to find the drops." So we went back and watched them. I should have done a video on it, and we kind of meant to, and we didn't get to it. But when you're looking at someone that drops a lot of balls, and I'll use a guy that I scouted really closely when he came out, and that's Butler out of what was his, he ended up going fourth round to the Cardinals. He's now a tight end, Hakeem Butler. And so I was able to, and I had to ask around because I don't know a whole lot about wide receiver technique in terms of actually catching the ball, but you could see issues with his technique where he was not he was not setting up his triangle well enough to catch the football. Yeah. That is not there's not structural problems with how JK Dobbins tries to catch the football. No. So that's not the issue. It's not technique based. Brashard Perriman also had technique problems, and he also had concentration problems. So you could use Perriman as a nice example of how to break down all the different types of drops you can have as a receiver. And so, I was able to kind of look at Dobbins' drops, and you're bang on. There were plays where he was looking up the field. There's a play where he's just staring right at the ball and it just hits his hands and drops. So, either he has stone hands, which I don't think there's a big enough sample to say that. You can go back and watch his college. He has pretty soft hands, or you're like, it's a rookie. He hasn't figured out how to kind of put the mental part together. And so we'll find out this year, but I feel quite confident in predicting that he's going to make a bigger impact in the passing game.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he caught 20 to 30 balls each year at Ohio State. Yeah. So you've got a sample size there to go and look at, and it doesn't. I think his hands are fine.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of leads us in now because, we've talked about the top two guys. We know these are going to be the top two guys. I don't think anybody else sitting around on the running back group are challenging them. We'll take another look at them. So we have Justice Hill returning. He's been our RB3 for 2 years. He hasn't been able to make a major impact, but he has, he hasn't necessarily been bad when he's gotten in the game. He's had some splash runs. He has that elite speed. When they drafted him, in 2019 and they had Ingram and Gus, I was like blown away. He had the best 40 time of all running backs in that draft class. I thought it was a nice element to add, but a bit more of an explosive runner, smaller guy, but he had that kind of deep speed that we might want in a home run runner. So, what do you think about Justice Hill vis-a-vis Tyson Williams and Nate McCrary? Is there an actual competition for that third running back spot? Does Hill just walk away with it? Tell me about some of the things you know about Williams and McCrary and how they could threaten Hill.
Yeah, so I think so the first thing, full disclosure, Nate McCrary was out of Saginaw Valley State, so I did not watch Nate McCrary going into the draft, and I found it very difficult to find any tape on him. So he's a bit of an unknown. But I do think there is a battle that will go on between Justice Hill and Tyson Williams. I really liked Tyson Williams coming out. And it comes from, I think, from my kind of want to go and unearth gems, which I think is kind of why we all love the draft. Yeah. Tyson Williams was, for anybody who doesn't know, he was in North Carolina. He transferred out to South Carolina, and then he transferred to BYU because he couldn't win a job in North Carolina and South Carolina. And then when he got to BYU, he showed why that was absolutely nonsensical that he couldn't win a job because he was really good for a month at BYU, and then he tore his ACL. So you've got just no kind of real sample on him. So it is a big if about whether this kid can play. But in that month, you did see a really good prospect, and clearly he fell to be undrafted because of those difficulties, and because he was then coming off a torn ACL as well. But what you saw vision, you saw balance, you saw him run with a low pad level, you saw him finish, you saw everything that you wanted to see, and he has NFL running back size. So and coming off that torn ACL without a training camp last year, I do wonder whether he is going to factor in a little more. And the reason I think he's going to factor in a little more is because of what I talked about before, that I think with Justice Hill, they were looking for that speed element, and I think it was about how the whole offense fit with that speed element. And I think they get a lot of that from Dobbins now. So I think there'll be a battle, but it's based on a couple of things, which is like what we cannot not take into account is Justice Hill's ability on special teams.
And yeah, no, I just want to throw it out there because I think it has to be the X factor. And I'm looking at the numbers right now. He went from 16 games suited up in 2019, where he played 97 special team snaps, and then he had only 12 games played in 2020 because of a few inactive games, and he played 192. So 4 less games, but just under 100 more special team snaps. And we specifically saw him carve out a role as a gunner. And so that's really tell me a little bit about that. What did you see from him as a gunner?
I mean, as a gunner, he has that speed, I think it's 4.3 speed he has. So he has that already. And as a gunner, you just saw, outstanding competitive toughness. This guy is competitive as the day is long. He's aggressive. He was so disciplined with his lanes. And he has surprising tackling ability for a running back. So I do think that is clearly going to factor into the play. But I thought the reason that I think it'll be more of a battle was actually the flirt that they had with Todd Gurley and may still have with him, which tells me that, and this is something MC said to me before, which is that, maybe they feel, I felt like Justice Hill was a very good special teams player. If they feel that he's a good special teams player, they may feel that they can replicate that production elsewhere. And what they want is a more complete running back that could potentially step in if there are injuries higher up the depth chart. And that might be what they're looking for. And if they're looking for that will mean there's a battle with Tyson Williams.
I think that's got to be the big thing. Because I mean, I can't think of too many, at least in the rate. I don't follow special teams on every team, but I can't think of too many former running backs that kind of had that type of role. It's a little bit more rare. Usually, they're your middle guy on the punt team where they're providing protection and then taking on pursuit lanes, but not necessarily as the gunner. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Hill can't continue to do that job. They're gonna, but it's more like they're gonna have to weigh those. It's gonna be, if we use a DB as a gunner instead of Hill, and as a byproduct, we get someone who's a bit of a better running back to be the running back 3, provide that type of depth in case we do suffer an injury. That's the calculation that's going to go through their head. So, and we do have some strong special teams guys on that defensive back group. Like they brought back Harris, the kid out of who came to us from the Broncos, who was an absolute, him and Hill were both madmen on those like they're just flying with reckless abandon. I was concerned for their safety, but it was kind of nice because we've gotten away from Chris Moore. Chris Moore's long gone. He's no longer going to be the gunner on the team. But I could definitely see there being a balance, or it's not a balance, a nice battle there with Williams for being an actual RB3. And I'm like you, I haven't been able to see Nate McCrary, so I'm not going to sit here and blow smoke up anyone's butt about but he has some really positive reviews coming out of not only OTAs, but some of the guys that did get the pleasure to watch him play in college. So if there's ever a spot where they're going to have a guy on offense on the squad as an undrafted free agent, it's always like linebacker on defense and maybe a running back on offense. So, I definitely don't discount it. That's for sure.
I agree.
And so looking at the last piece of the running back group, so people are going to be wondering, Cole, why did you not have Ben Mason as a fullback on the? It's a great question. So I really am looking at Ben Mason in year 1 as a tight end 3 competition guy. And that's just simply because I will be shocked and floored if they keep if they keep 2 fullbacks. It's just going to be very hard for them to justify. Now, if I am the Ravens trying to get that out there, it's going to be where he's a key special teamer, kind of like we've seen with Jordan Richards or, not so much. Well, Anthony Levine lately, because he hasn't been playing too many defensive snaps in the dime like he did in the previous years. But if he's able to carve out that role and technically be fullback too, but I can't see a spot where he's not going to be in as like a tight end, move tight end, H-back, sniffer, that type of role. So, how do you see it? What do you think happens? Is Pat Ricard in any sort of jeopardy for a roster spot?
Yeah, no is the short answer.
I almost didn't want to ask the question.
And if he is, it's going to be like the Simpsons gif with pitchforks and fire stick. Because I love Pat Ricard. For anybody who doesn't know, nobody will know. I don't think I've said this although I think I wrote a piece. No, I did write a piece about Ben Mason before the draft, where I said I played fullback. So fullbacks are very, very fond in my heart. But Ben Mason, I think the thing for me is people have to remember. So I actually, the piece I wrote actually sort of said, I think we should maybe draft Ben Mason with a final pick. And people need to remember he was the final pick of the draft for the Ravens. Yep. So you've got to put yourself in the Ravens' shoes, and they could have traded back to get Ben Mason. They did not need to take him there, and we can maybe have the argument that they should have taken some offensive line help. But if you do want Ben Mason with the last pick of the draft, do you trade back and take an offer to trade back from the late 5th to the late 6th, and you maybe get like a 6th next year or a 5th next year? Or do you just take Ben Mason and not worry about trying? Maybe they didn't get any offers. Maybe they just wanted to secure their guy. He plays so much like a Raven. It's ridiculous. And you do have to think about the succession plan behind Pat Ricard. So I did think that there was a chance that they would take a guy like Ben Mason. And the like I said, the way he is, he just, if you find my piece, he just plays like a Raven. He's great. But I think very much like you that this, as we've talked about this before, I think this is a classic broken nail to IR situation. It just seems like that because I think they took him in the draft because if you put yourself in his shoes, would you sign as a UDFA with the Baltimore Ravens, knowing that Pat Ricard is entrenched on that roster? I'm not sure you would.
I don't think you can.
But yeah.
Yeah. And like I have seen him on tape do some very varying things in terms of, going in motion, being a sniffer. And those are all things we see Ricard lined up, split out, and then motion in as a sniffer. Like they're going to be able to, if Ben Mason is on the team and they are actually using him on the field with Ricard at the same time, whether you want to call it 22 or 13 or whatever the heck you consider him for personnel. Good luck, Warren Sharp, on figuring out how you're going to classify that, because I don't really know what you call him. But I see him more in that role, whereas he's not going to be more. And I mean, like, even if you look at Nick Boyle, sometimes Nick Boyle motions into the backfield where a fullback would line up. So when I say I see him as a tight end 3 competition with Oliver, Breland, Eli Wolf, don't know if I'm missing, but that kind of group. We're going to be talking about the tight ends here soon. But I see him factoring more into that competition, or he is your core special team guy, like a Jordan Richards, like a now present day Anthony Levine, where he doesn't necessarily, like, he's not on the team specifically for his fullback abilities, but because he's a game day activation, if he is a special teams specific player, it does mean they could use him on a handful of snaps and very versatile ways. And the very fact that they could run out a 22 package where you have Boyle and Mason as your tight ends, and then you have Gus and Ricard lined up, but then you're also putting a speedster like Hollywood out wide. Like it could lead to some actually interesting abilities. One question I did want to ask specific to Mason, and this kind of plays into the tight end episode, but I'm very curious to kind of hear your thoughts. He only caught 3 balls at Michigan, so we don't have a big sample size. But when we look at those 3 balls, what could we expect from him as a pass catcher?
I think what you can expect for him, the way I described him was he's like the middle path between Ricard and Juice. I think he doesn't. The thing that's ironically the thing that's missing for him actually is the kind of prototypical fullback size. I mean, Ricard maybe has reset the prototype, but he isn't actually that big. So you don't know yet whether he's like the competitiveness, the aggressiveness, even the technical ability as a blocker he has. So you feel pretty comfortable translating that. You don't necessarily feel as comfortable translating him as a receiver. He does have, you can see him run more routes than when than balls he catches. But I think the thing that you really can't project, it's unfair to project him in that sense, is because he moved around an awful lot at Michigan. They moved him onto the defensive line earlier in his career, which parallels with Ricard.
I love
He's
it.
great. And I think you're right in that it'll be if he makes the roster this year and he's not on IR, I think that will be where he makes the roster, is as the tight end 3. And it will be a philosophical decision, like you said, about a different type of play calling that they make. But I personally, I don't think he will make it as a tight end 3, because I think they will feel that they need to get a third tight end that produces in the passing game in the same way that Hurst did. Or maybe the investment at receiver makes them feel like they don't need to do that, and they don't need to find that as much anymore. So it'll be interesting to see. But with you, I'm kind of with you, I think, on this.
Yeah, I think this is where we kind of see the different approaches you can take for those last kind of 4 or 5, well, maybe 3, 4 roster spots where they are kind of more dedicated special teamers. And yes, they have a position and they'll still kind of play that position. Like we still saw some of those special team specific guys play at their normal position, whether it was, due to injuries, running down the clock, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't discount it, but I don't expect to see Mason out there playing a whole lot of fullback while Ricard sitting on the bench healthy. It wouldn't make sense. They paid Ricard. They love Ricard. I love Ricard. You love Ricard. Everybody loves Ricard. So, that's how I kind of see it shaking out. But, this was an awesome preview. We're trying to keep these kind of short and sweet. I love how we just kind of dove through the whole position. Do you have any final thoughts? Any sort of, if you had to guess right now, who's going to be your kind of running back group? Let us know.
Yeah, I feel like it's Dobbins, Edwards, and I think it will end up being Hill and Ricard. I think Tyson Williams will push him close, and the preseason games will be really key this year. We didn't have them last year, so it'll be really interesting to see how Williams performs, and maybe McCrary emerges as well. But I think Hill's special teams ability will probably just edge them out, because I think he was better than good. I think he was very good as a gunner. So I think that's probably ultimately what will keep him on the roster. And he, like you said, he didn't let himself down in the passing game. Sorry, you wanted a short answer, and I gave you another long answer. But before we finish, let's just appreciate how ridiculously good Pat Ricard is, and how unbelievably athletic this guy is. At the size he is, it'll be really interesting next season to see if we can pay him, because I'm not sure anybody's going to value him the same way that we do. And not the fans, the franchise.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this is a very Pat Ricard friendly podcast. He doesn't know it, but he's a friend of the program, because he's my kind of guy. Like the fact that he plays 2 ways, he's a blue collar. When people are like, "What's play like a Raven mean?" I can just send them a picture of Pat Ricard. It's literally him. So. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today, James. You can find James' work on his website, redstarbaltimore.com, as well as his work being done on russellstreetreport.com. That's all we have for you today. We're going to be getting into a couple more positional groups before we switch to the defensive side of the ball. So stay tuned for that. Also, take the time to drop it in the comment section below who you think is going to be our running back group going in. Do you disagree with us? I actually completely agree with James, but let us know what you think down in the comments. Be sure to like the video if you're enjoying this series, and of course, subscribe so you can find your way back. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out.